I never believed in fate until that rainy night in Chicago, when I saved the life of the most dangerous man in the city. My name is Alessandra Reyes. I'm 32 years old, a trauma nurse at Cook County Hospital, and a single mother to an 8-year-old girl named Maya. My husband Marco died 3 years ago under circumstances that were never fully clarified. The police said it was a robbery, but I always knew there was more to it. Something he hid from me on the nights he came home late, with that distant and guilty look in his eyes. That October night, I had just finished a double shift at the hospital. My feet ached inside my worn-out sneakers, my uniform was stained with coffee and the blood of a patient we couldn't save, and all I wanted was to pick up Maya from the neighbor's house and sleep for 12 hours straight. But single mother life doesn't allow for such luxuries. I was walking down Ashland Street holding my daughter's hand, who was half asleep on her feet after waiting for me until nearly midnight. The rain was pouring heavily, soaking our clothes, and I could barely see through the curtain of water falling from the sky. That's when I heard the noise. A metallic crash, tires skidding on the wet asphalt, glass shattering. My nurse's instinct spoke louder than my fear, and I pulled Maya behind a parked car, peeking toward the alley where the sounds were coming from. A black SUV was overturned, smoke billowing from the crumpled hood, and a man was lying on the ground, half hidden in the shadows. But what froze me wasn't the accident itself. It was the other men who got out of a second vehicle, speaking in Russian, with guns in their hands. I should have run. I should have grabbed my daughter and gotten out of there as fast as possible. But then the injured man lifted his head, and even in the darkness, even with his face covered in blood, I recognized those eyes. Eyes I'd seen before, in an old photograph I found hidden among Marco's things after he died. A photo he never explained, of a meeting he swore never happened. And now that man was there, dying on the ground, while the Russians laughed and prepared their guns to finish the job. Maya tugged at my sleeve and whispered that the man was hurt, that I always said we should help hurt people, even when we were scared. My daughter's innocence gave me courage. I shouted that I was a nurse, that he would die without help, and one of the Russians, a tall man with a horrible scar on his face, pointed his gun at me. That's when the injured man spoke, his voice hoarse but full of authority, even on the brink of death. He said my last name, Reyes. How did he know my name? Then he said something that stopped my world. He said Marco owed a blood debt to his family, and now that debt passed to me. Police sirens approached, and the Russians fled hurriedly, leaving the man to die. I ran to him, my medical training taking over. Multiple injuries, possible internal bleeding, broken legs. He needed immediate surgery. But when I grabbed his phone to call for help, he gripped my wrist with surprising strength and told me not to call an ambulance. He said to call someone named Franco. I hesitated, but there was something in his eyes, a mix of desperation and command, that made me obey. 3 minutes later, black cars arrived from all directions. Men in suits emerged like soldiers on a military operation, picked up the injured man with professional efficiency, and one of them, a gray-haired gentleman who introduced himself as Franco, told me that Don Costello would never forget what I'd done. It was only as they were leaving that I understood who I'd saved. Victor Costello, the Italian Mafia boss of Chicago, the man who controlled half the city. And somehow, my late husband was connected to him. I held Maya against my chest and realized my life would never be the same. 24 hours after saving Victor Costello, I was sitting in a mansion that looked like it was straight out of a movie, trying to process the truth about the man I'd been married to for 6 years. Franco had shown up at my apartment door early in the morning, polite but firm, saying Don Costello requested my presence. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. He also mentioned, almost casually, that suspicious men had been seen watching my building during the night. Russian men. I packed a small suitcase for me and Maya, told the neighbor we were visiting an aunt, and got into the black car with tinted windows waiting on the street. The Costello mansion was on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by high walls and security cameras on every corner. Armed guards patrolled the meticulously maintained gardens. Maya was amazed by the size of the house, the fountains and statues, but all I could feel was a tightness in my chest. We were led to a luxurious waiting room, with antique furniture that probably cost more than my annual salary, and we waited. I held my daughter's hand and tried to look calm, but inside I was terrified. When they finally took me to Victor, he was in a room that had been transformed into a private hospital. State-of-the-art medical equipment surrounded a huge bed, and he was lying there, pale but conscious, with his legs in casts and tubes connected to his arm. When our eyes met, he dismissed everyone from the room with a hand gesture. We were alone, and the silence was so heavy, I could hear my own heart beating. He spoke first, asking me to sit. His voice was stronger than the night before, loaded with that natural authority powerful men have. He said he needed to tell me the truth about Marco. My husband wasn't a construction worker like he always told me. He was an accountant, but not the kind who works in a regular office. Marco worked for the Costello family, moving money, hiding funds, making millions of dollars disappear and reappear in convenient places. He was good at what he did. So good that Victor trusted him with secrets that could destroy the entire organization. But then Marco made the fatal mistake. He stole $2 million that didn't belong to Victor, but to Sicilian partners of the family. Money that, if it vanished, would cause a war. I listened to it all feeling like I was floating outside my body. The man I loved, the father of my daughter, was a criminal. He had lied to me every day of our marriage. Every time he said he was working late, every time he came home with that guilty look, every extra cent that mysteriously appeared in our bank account. It was all a lie. Victor kept talking, telling me how Marco was caught, how he begged for mercy, how he had a young daughter and a wife who knew nothing. Victor said he could have killed Marco right there, that his men were waiting for that order, but he didn't give it. Instead, he offered a deal. Marco would return the money, leave the organization, start a new life. But in exchange, he owed a blood debt. If Victor ever needed him, Marco would come. No questions, no hesitation. And if something happened to Marco before that debt was paid, it would pass to his family. Victor showed me an old yellowed envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter from Marco, dated 3 years ago, just days before his death. My hands shook as I started reading. Marco wrote that he had made terrible mistakes, that he had gotten involved with dangerous people, that he had lied to me to protect me. He said that if I was reading that letter, it meant his choices had caught up with him, and he asked me to trust Victor Costello because he was a man of honor who would protect his family. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading. Victor then told me how Marco died. It wasn't a robbery, it was the Sicilians. They found out about the theft and sent a hitman before Victor could intervene. Marco was executed 3 blocks from our house, coming home from the fake job he used as a cover. Victor said that was a debt he carried, that he had failed to protect Marco. And now, he was determined not to fail me and Maya. But there was a problem. The Russians who tried to kill him the night before were from the Moscow Bratva, and they had seen me. In his world, that meant I had chosen a side. And now I was a target. The first days at the Costello mansion were surreal. Maya thought we were on vacation at a luxury hotel, exploring the immense gardens, amazed by the indoor pool and the library that had more books than she'd ever seen. But I knew the truth. We were prisoners, even if our prison had hand-painted ceilings, Italian marble furniture, and food prepared by a private chef. I lost my job at the hospital after 3 days of no-shows and no way to explain where I was. My cell phone was replaced with a new one, with a number only Victor and Franco knew. Armed guards followed our every move, always polite, always vigilant. Victor's recovery was brutal. I saw the physical therapist coming and going from his room, heard his screams of pain through the thick walls when they forced his broken legs to move. The doctor said he might never walk normally again. His spine had been damaged in the accident, 3 vertebrae fractured, nerves compressed. For a man like him, used to commanding with physical presence, the wheelchair was a humiliation worse than any wound. I tried to keep my distance, stay in my room with Maya, avoid getting more involved than I already was. But the nurse in me couldn't ignore when I saw something wrong. It was one afternoon when I was passing by the hallway and heard a groan of pain coming from his room. The door was ajar. I peeked in and saw Victor alone, trying to stand up from the wheelchair, gripping the armrest, his face contorted in effort and agony. He managed to stand for 3 seconds before his legs gave out and he fell back into the chair, punching the arm so hard his knuckles bled. That's when he saw me watching. The vulnerability in his eyes quickly turned to anger, that cold dawn mask slipping back into place. He said he didn't need pity. I entered the room and replied that it wasn't pity, it was professional medical assessment, and that he was doing everything wrong. In the following days, I started helping him with physical therapy. Not because he asked, but because I simply showed up at exercise time and took control from the incompetent therapists he'd hired. I knew trauma rehabilitation, had worked with severe accident victims, knew exactly how much pressure to apply, which movements would make a difference. Victor resisted at first, too proud to accept help, especially from a woman he felt he needed to protect. But pain is a great motivator, and eventually he gave in. Our sessions were tense, full of uncomfortable silences and glances that lasted a second longer than they should. It was during one of those sessions that Maya burst into the room without knocking, as only children do. She had a book in her hands, an old Italian edition of The Little Prince she'd found in the library. She asked Victor if he could read it to her, since I was always too tired. I started to say he was busy, but Victor took the book from her hands with a gentleness I didn't know he possessed. He said she could sit, and he began reading, translating from Italian to English with that heavy accent that got stronger when he was relaxed. Maya was mesmerized, and I stood there, holding his leg in a stretch position, watching the feared Mafia boss read a children's story to my daughter. That became routine. Physical therapy in the morning, his business meetings in the afternoon while I kept Maya occupied, and evenings reading in the library. Victor had an impressive collection of classics, in Italian, English, even some in French. I discovered he had studied literature in college before being forced to take over the family business when his father died. He talked about Dante and Petrarch with the same passion he used to discuss territory and deals. There were layers to that man, depths he hid behind the Don Costello mask. And the more time I spent there, the more I saw the man behind the monster. But reality always came back. Franco would show up with reports on Bratva movements, Russian men asking about me at the hospital, veiled threats. Victor increased security, added more guards, restricted our freedom even further. I began to understand that this wasn't temporary. The war between Victor and the Russians was just beginning, and somehow Maya and I had become central pieces in this deadly game. I should have been terrified, and part of me was. But another part, a part I didn't want to admit, was starting to feel safe there, protected, and dangerously attracted to the man who had turned our prison into something that was starting to feel like home. The first time I truly saw Victor's dark side was on a November night, 6 weeks after we arrived at the mansion. I had just put Maya to bed and was heading back to my room when I heard raised voices coming from his office. The door was closed, but the old mansion walls weren't as thick as they seemed. I recognized Victor's voice, cold and cutting like a blade, speaking in rapid Italian too fast for me to fully understand. But I caught some words: traitor, blood, example. Then I heard a scream, a muffled gunshot, and silence. My body froze in the hallway. My nurse's brain screamed for me to go in, check if someone needed medical help, but my survival instinct kept me paralyzed. 5 minutes later, the door opened and 2 men came out carrying something wrapped in plastic tarp. They passed by me without a word, as if I were invisible, as if this were just another normal Tuesday. Victor appeared in the office doorway, saw me standing there, and for the first time since we'd met, he seemed genuinely disturbed that I'd witnessed something. He didn't try to explain. He didn't offer apologies or justifications. He just said that man had betrayed the family, put lives at risk, including mine and Maya's. He said that in his world, betrayal had only one price. I should have run in that moment. I should have grabbed my daughter and demanded he let us go. Consequences be damned. But instead, I heard my own voice asking if the man had a family. Victor replied yes, a wife and 2 children, and that they would be financially taken care of for the rest of their lives. As if money made up for a dead father. As if that made it all acceptable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about who I'd become. I was a nurse. My oath was to preserve life, not live with someone who took it. But then I thought about Maya, sleeping safely in the next room, unaware that men wanted to hurt us. I thought about how Victor had honored Marco's debt even after his death, how he treated my daughter with genuine kindness, how his eyes softened when he thought no one was looking. I was starting to understand that morality in his world wasn't black and white, it was gray, in every shade imaginable. The following weeks brought a strange routine. Victor was progressing in physical therapy, managing to stand for minutes at a time, taking short steps with support. His determination was fierce, almost frightening. He refused to accept that he might never walk normally again. I admired that willpower, even knowing it came from the same place as his brutality. Maya continued to thrive, treating the mansion like her personal playground, calling Victor Mr. V because she couldn't pronounce Costello right. He pretended the nickname annoyed him, but I saw the small smile he hid. It was during one of those afternoons while I was helping Victor walk in the garden that he finally talked about his brother. Carlo had been 2 years younger, studied law, dreamed of making the Costello family legitimate. He was negotiating deals with prosecutors, preparing the transition from illegal businesses to clean investments. Then the Bratva blew up his car in broad daylight, sending a clear message. Victor described it all in a monotone voice, but I could feel the pain radiating from him in waves. He said Carlo was the good part of the family, the hope for redemption, and that when he died, any chance of Victor becoming something more than a criminal died with him. I stopped walking and forced Victor to look at me. I told him it wasn't too late, that he could still choose a different path, that honoring Carlo's memory meant continuing his work, not drowning in revenge. Victor laughed, but it was a bitter sound, without humor. He said I was naive, that I didn't understand how his world worked, that men like him didn't get redemption. I replied that maybe he was right, but I'd seen real monsters, treated domestic violence victims, held the hands of people dying alone. And he wasn't a monster. He was a man who had made bad choices, but who still had the capacity to make better ones. Something changed between us in that moment. Victor pulled me closer, his hand on my waist for balance, but the closeness was more than physical. He said my name, just that, but the way he said it made my heart race. We stood there in the autumn sunlit garden, two completely different worlds colliding, and for the first time I admitted to myself that I was falling in love with him, with a dangerous, complicated, impossible man. And that realization terrified me more than any Bratva threat. The betrayal came from within, as it always does in the best Mafia stories. Dante was one of Victor's capos, a man in his mid-30s, ambitious, charming, always smiling that smile that never reached his eyes. I'd never liked him, something about the way he looked at Victor, like he was constantly evaluating, calculating. Franco didn't trust him either. I'd overheard whispered conversations between him and Victor about questionable loyalty. But Victor believed in giving chances, in honoring family, and Dante was the son of a loyal soldier who had died protecting Victor's father decades ago. That inherited loyalty was supposed to mean something. It should have. It was almost midnight when the alarms went off. I woke instantly. Years of night shifts at the hospital had trained me to go from deep sleep to full alert in seconds. I ran to Maya's room, picked her up, still drowsy, put her coat over her pajamas. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel my pulse in my neck. I'd rehearsed this mentally dozens of times. The path to the panic room Franco had shown me, the security codes I'd memorized. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Victor's guards in the hallway. It was men I recognized from meetings, but their faces were different, hard, guns pointed. Dante was leading the group. He said my name with that false gentleness that made me want to vomit, asking me to come with them, that I wouldn't be hurt if I cooperated. Maya started crying, clinging to my neck, and I held her tighter, putting my body between her and the guns. I asked where Victor was, and Dante smiled that horrible smile. He said Victor was busy, that the family had decided it was time for a change in leadership, that a Don who fell in love and got weak didn't deserve respect. He said Maya and I were his insurance, that the Bratva would pay well for us, and with that money and Russian support, he'd take control of the Costello organization. I understood everything in a second. Dante had orchestrated it all. He'd probably been the one feeding our location to the Russians from the start, sabotaging security, planting seeds of doubt about Victor's leadership, and now he was using us as bargaining chips. I told him Victor would kill him for this, that he had no idea the mistake he was making. Dante laughed and said Victor could barely walk, let alone be a threat. He grabbed my arm hard and Maya screamed, a high-pitched scream of pure terror that echoed through the mansion's halls. That scream brought Victor. I heard rapid, irregular footsteps, the sound of a cane hitting the marble floor. Then he appeared at the end of the hallway, and the sight of him made me forget to breathe. He was standing, without the wheelchair, leaning on a cane but upright, powerful, with a gun in his free hand. His face was a mask of fury so intense that even Dante took a step back. Victor said his name, just that, but the tone carried a promise of death. Dante pointed his gun at Maya's head, using the only leverage he had. He said if Victor took one more step, the child would die. I didn't think. Maternal instinct overrode any sense of self-preservation. I threw myself in front of Maya, screaming to take me, to leave my daughter. Victor roared my name, and then everything happened in slow motion and impossible speed at the same time. Victor shot, not at Dante, but at his leg, making him fall. Other shots rang out, Victor's loyal guards appearing from all sides, confronting the traitors. I covered Maya with my body, protecting her ears from the noise, her eyes from the violence. The shootout lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When silence returned, I lifted my head trembling, bodies on the floor, blood on the marble walls. Victor was standing over Dante, who was groaning in pain, holding his bleeding leg. Victor said something in Italian, words I didn't understand, but that made Dante pale even more. Then Victor pointed the gun at his head, and I turned Maya's face, pressing it against my shoulder. I heard the shot. I felt Maya shudder, and I knew it was over. Victor had done what men like him do. He had protected what was his and eliminated the threat. There was no going back now. Not for any of us. The days following Dante's betrayal were the tensest since we arrived at the mansion. Victor was different, colder, more distant, as if he'd put all his walls back up. He barely spoke to me beyond necessities. avoided our established physical therapy times, locked himself in the office with Franco and other capos for endless hours. I understood. He'd been betrayed by someone he trusted, nearly lost everything, and worse, shown weakness by caring about me and Maya. In his world, that was unforgivable. Maya was having nightmares. She'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night, reliving those terrible moments in the hallway. I'd hold her, sing lullabies, promise we were safe, but the words sounded empty even to me. How could I promise safety when we lived in a house where men had died violently meters from our room? I started questioning all my choices. I should have refused Victor's protection from the start. I should have taken Maya and disappeared, changed names, started over in another state. But it was too late now. The Russians knew our faces. Dante had confirmed our importance to Victor before dying. We were permanent targets. It was Franco who finally told me what was happening. He found me in the garden one afternoon, while Maya was drawing on the grass. He said Alexei Volkov, the Bratva leader who tried to kill Victor, had sent a message, a proposal. If Victor handed over me and Maya, the war would end. Permanent peace between the families, territory divided fairly, no more bloodshed. All Victor had to do was turn us over. Franco said this looking at the horizon, not at me, as if he couldn't face my reaction. I asked what Victor had replied. Franco finally looked at me, and there was something like respect in his eyes when he said Victor had refused immediately, that he'd said very specific words in Italian that basically meant Alexei could go to hell. But Franco also said the refusal had consequences. The Bratva was preparing for total war. They'd go after all of Victor's businesses, all his allies, everyone he cared about, until nothing was left. And all because Victor refused to give up a woman and child he'd known for only a few months. That night, after putting Maya to bed, I went to Victor's office. He was alone, staring out the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand. I said we needed to talk. He didn't turn around, just said there was nothing to talk about. I ignored that and continued. I said I knew about Alexei's proposal, that I understood the impossible position he was in, that Maya and I weren't worth a war that would destroy everything he'd built. I said we were willing to go, that he could give us new identities and send us far away, that he didn't need to sacrifice his empire for us. It was only then that he turned, and the intensity in his eyes almost made me step back. He crossed the room, limping but determined, and stopped so close I could feel the heat from his body. He said I didn't understand anything, that it wasn't about strategic value or business decisions. He said that for the first time in his life, he had something that mattered more than power, more than territory, more than the damn Costello family. He said Maya and I had given him something he thought died with Carlo: hope, purpose, a reason to be more than the monster his father created. Then he did something completely unexpected. He knelt down, with difficulty because of his still recovering legs, and took my hand. There was a small box in his other hand. Inside, a ring, simple but beautiful, with a diamond that sparkled under the office light. He said my full name, Alessandra Maria Reyes, and asked if I would marry him, not out of obligation, not because of a debt, but because he loved me. Because I had saved not just his life, but his soul. Because he wanted to spend the rest of his days deserving the love of a woman too good for him. I should have said no. I should have been rational, thought about Maya, the danger, the impossibility of it all. But when I looked at that man kneeling in front of me, I saw not the feared Don Costello, but Victor, the man who read stories to my daughter, who fought every day to walk again, who was willing to lose everything to keep us safe. And I said yes. I said yes knowing I was choosing a dangerous, complicated, probably insane path. But it was my choice. Finally, after years living with Marco's lies, after months being protected but voiceless, I was choosing my own fate, and I chose Victor. The war with the Bratva lasted 3 brutal months. I won't lie and say it was easy, or that there weren't moments when I questioned everything. There were nights when Victor didn't come home until dawn. Covered in blood I prayed wasn't his. There were days when Franco showed up with news of more soldiers dead, more businesses attacked, more threats. Maya stopped having nightmares but developed a worrying silence, as if she was holding all the fear inside her. I did what I could, kept routines, pretended normalcy, but we all knew we were living in a bubble that could burst at any moment. The turning point came unexpectedly. Victor had spent weeks gathering evidence, using every contact he had in the police, FBI, even Interpol. He compiled a massive dossier on the Bratva's operations, trafficking routes, offshore accounts, corrupt politicians on their payroll. It was enough information to dismantle the entire Russian organization in Chicago. But using it meant exposing some of his own operations too. It meant sacrificing lucrative businesses, burning bridges with questionable allies, essentially dismantling half the Costello empire. I was there when he made the decision. It was late at night, and he was in the office with Franco and the other capos debating options. I'd gone to get coffee for everyone, a domestic role that made me feel useful when everything else was out of my control. I heard one of the capos arguing that turning over the information was suicide, that it would destroy everything the family had built for generations. Victor was silent for a long moment, then said something that made me stop at the door. He said maybe it was time to build something new, something Carlo would be proud of, something that wouldn't shame the woman he loved or the child who was starting to call him dad. The reaction was mixed. Some capos supported it, tired of constant violence, seeing opportunity to legitimize operations. Others opposed, calling Victor weak, saying love had ruined his judgment. There was a tense moment when I thought there'd be another betrayal, another Dante. But Franco stood up and said anyone who questioned the Don could leave now, and he'd personally ensure they never worked in Chicago again. The silence that followed was answer enough. Victor still commanded respect, still was the leader, but now he was leading in a different direction. The information was delivered anonymously but strategically. In 2 weeks, half the Bratva leadership was in jail or fleeing the country. Alexei Volkov was caught trying to cross the border into Canada, with suitcases full of cash and fake documents. The Russian organization in Chicago collapsed. Victor lost territory and businesses in the process, as expected, but he also gained something more valuable: peace and space to rebuild differently. He started investing heavily in legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, importing Italian products. There were still questionable aspects. I wasn't naive, but the violence decreased dramatically. 6 months after the proposal, we got married in a small ceremony in the mansion's garden. Maya was the flower girl, wearing a pink dress she picked herself, carrying flowers with adorable seriousness. Franco was Victor's best man. With tears in his eyes he tried to hide. There weren't many guests, just close family and a few loyal allies, but it was perfect. I wore a simple, elegant white dress, and when Victor saw me walking toward him, leaning on his cane but standing tall and strong, I saw tears in his eyes too. We exchanged vows we wrote ourselves. I promised to love him in all his shades of gray, to accept his past while we built a better future. He promised to protect, honor, and spend every day deserving the second chance I'd given him. Life didn't become a fairy tale. Victor was still Don Costello, still ran an organization, still made hard decisions I preferred not to know about. But he was also the man who woke up early to make breakfast for Maya before school, who donated money to open a community clinic in my name, who spent nights reading with me in the library, discussing literature and philosophy. Maya flourished, her therapy helping process the trauma, and she started calling Victor Dad naturally, without anyone asking. He cried the first time she did, locked in the bathroom where he thought no one could hear, but I heard. I often think about Marco, how it all started with his choices and his debt. Part of me is still angry at him for lying, for putting us in this situation. But another part is grateful, because without that blood debt, I never would have met Victor. I never would have discovered that love can exist in unlikely places, that redemption is possible even for men who've done terrible things, that family isn't just blood, but choice. Victor chose to honor Marco's debt. I chose to save Victor in that alley, and every day since we choose each other. In a world of violence and betrayal, that daily choice is our act of rebellion, our way of building something good from the ashes. And as improbable as it is, it works. We work. And that's all that matters.